My brother overheard his wife asking me to pay to edit out my disabled daughter from their wedding photos and immediately kicked her out. My younger brother David married Amelia, the joy of his life, just 2 weeks ago in a lovely and touching ceremony. Everyone who knew David could tell how much he loved Amelia, and he had been anticipating this day for a long time. Their invitation cards made it apparent that their wedding was once intended to be a totally child-free affair. That being said, David called me a few weeks prior to the wedding. He surprised me by telling me that he wanted to make an exception for my daughter Katie, who is his niece. Startled, I asked him if he was certain. David told me how much he adores Katie and that without her as their flower girl, he couldn't have the wedding. Hearing him say it nearly brought me to tears. Uncle David has always had a special place in Katie's heart, and she adores him. David reassured me that he had discussed it with his bride, and she was also in agreement. His sincerity was evident in his voice. He realized how much it would mean to Katie and didn't want her to miss such a significant day in his life. To put things in perspective, my daughter Katie was partially paralyzed at birth. The fact that she is unable to move her body beneath her arms has undoubtedly changed our lives. My husband Roger and I were devastated as parents when we first learned. The ground seemed to have been yanked out from beneath us. We refused to accept the diagnosis and were in total astonishment. We visited several doctors in a frantic attempt to get a different viewpoint in the hopes that someone could know the answer. We hoped for positive results from every test we could think of. We wanted to think that there could be a procedure or therapy available that could help Katie and give her the life she was due. However, the response was always the same, regardless of our actions or where we went, nothing could be done. It was really difficult to accept that our daughter's situation was irreversible. We went through a difficult period that was full of tears, insomnia, and unanswered questions. We were totally powerless. Every time we considered Katie's future, our hearts ached while we gazed at our darling daughter. We gradually started to locate and establish connections with other families who were traveling the same path as us, which provided us with some comfort despite the overwhelming sense of powerlessness. We began concentrating on what Katie could do and providing her with as much love and support as we could, rather than on what she couldn't accomplish. Uncle David is among those who have consistently brought Katie happiness and light. Her illness never caused him to treat her differently. He actually has a knack of making my daughter feel so relaxed and at ease that her illness seems to vanish when they are together. I've always valued this, especially when other family members can occasionally, even unintentionally, make situations difficult or uncomfortable. For instance, my own mother was obviously shaken when she first saw Katie after she was born and saw how paralyzed she was. Her response surprised me, even though I knew it was a tough thing for her to digest. Rather than provide consolation or encouragement, she drew me away and whispered that I ought to attempt to conceive another child. One that could walk. When I heard her remarks, my eyes widened in surprise. My mother persisted in pressuring me, suggesting that perhaps if I tried again, I would have a better baby. It seemed as though Katie's illness made her insufficient or unworthy. I was taken aback. What a callous thing it was to say. David, however, defended me right away and chastised our mother for being so callous and cruel. He assured her that Katie was ideal just the way she was and that she didn't require comparison or replacement. When he stood up for my child, I will always remember the ferocity in his voice. When I was still grieving and accepting the reality of Katie's condition, he chastised our mother for pressuring me to become pregnant. Since then, I have minimized my interaction with my mother and have forbidden her from spending any alone time with Katie. In the meantime, David would visit my daughter every weekend, rain or shine, simply to be with her. They would play games, watch ridiculous shows, or just joke around for hours. Katie would light up for a few hours on those weekends in a way that was so innocent and happy. She can simply be a child enjoying herself with her worldly favorite. Both she and we have benefited from their relationship. I was therefore really moved when he called to ask if I might make an exception so that my daughter may attend his wedding. In addition to being a lovely way for David to celebrate their relationship on his special day, I knew that letting Katie be there would mean the world to her. I was thrilled for Katie to be a flower girl, so I consented to bring her along. I don't believe his wife Amelia was as excited about the prospect of having Katie at the wedding as David was. Amelia contacted me directly a few days after David called to give me the invitation for Katie. She told me that in order for her to let Katie attend their wedding, she had some requirements. The conditions annoyed me because they were strangely detailed. Initially, Amelia demanded that Katie wear a beige dress, which she described as flowing and appropriate for the wedding atmosphere. She also stated that Katie's hair had to be styled so as not to detract from the beauty of the wedding. Her demands were so domineering that I was surprised. But I decided to keep my mouth shut. After all, we had to follow her wedding theme because it was her wedding. I nodded in agreement and promised to follow her instructions because I didn't want to cause any conflict or discomfort for David. Ultimately, my top priority was for Katie to be able to support her uncle. I went out right away and got Katie a gorgeous beige dress. Amelia urged me to purchase it since it was understated yet sophisticated. My daughter would feel unique, I knew. Since Amelia had requested that I give her a photograph of the outfit after I bought it, I snapped a picture of it and sent it to her. To my astonishment, she wasn't satisfied, even though I had anticipated she would be. Amelia soon responded that the garment appeared lifeless and was too bland. "I would like something a bit more colorful," she replied. I was perplexed and angry. Isn't this precisely what she requested? I didn't want to protest or argue, though. I was trying to maintain the peace as best I could. This time, I chose to send her a couple options before making a purchase rather than wasting my money on another dress that I bought on my own. I didn't want to spend money on something that she would undoubtedly turn down once more. When Amelia eventually selected one of the outfits I had received, I was astounded by what I saw. The dress she picked was almost the exact same shade of beige as the one I had previously purchased, which she had critiqued for being too beige. The slightest trace of a pinkish tone, which was almost perceptible, was the sole difference. I began to realize then that this had nothing to do with the dress or the color. Amelia was purposely complicating matters. She seemed to be putting me to the test or creating barriers to force me to do things that I didn't want to do. She hadn't told me outright, but there might be a reason why she didn't want my daughter to attend the wedding. I didn't want to cause her any unnecessary trouble. She needed to speak with my brother and work things out if she wanted to remove my daughter from the invitation. But she never did, and the wedding proceeded according to schedule. Katie looked magnificent as she walked down the aisle in her gorgeous beige dress, the one that Amelia had finally approved, on the day of my brother's wedding. As she wheeled forward, the dress flowed elegantly, and she paused to fling flower petals, her face beaming with joy. The whole room seems to stop. The visitors let out a loud gasp, and then there was a round of applause. As she continued down the aisle, distributing flowers and making her steady progress in her wheelchair, I could feel the excitement emanating from her as people couldn't stop gushing about how lovely she looked. At that moment, I was overcome with pride and love for my daughter. One of the memories I will always cherish is seeing her there, taking full part in such a momentous occasion. My eyes filled with tears of happiness, and I looked at David, whose face reflected mine. He grinned warmly and proudly as he gazed at Katie, obviously moved by her presence and her luminous personality. David approached her as she arrived at the front and knelt down to offer her a warm embrace. Their heartfelt moment together revealed a lot about their strong relationship. After ensuring she was comfortable and able to participate in the ceremony from the front row, he assisted her in positioning herself to the side. Amelia started walking down the aisle a short while later. As she made her way to the altar, she was undoubtedly stunning in her wedding gown. I couldn't help but notice that she looked at Katie for a moment. I briefly hoped that she might smile at my daughter, showing some appreciation for her presence and the part she played in this significant day. However, without even a faint grin, Amelia gazed past Katie and rolled her eyes visibly. It was impossible for me not to feel disappointed. Nevertheless, I decided to ignore the idea because I didn't want anything to ruin the day's happiness. I was ecstatic for my brother when David and Amelia exchanged vows and the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Nothing else mattered at that time since he had at last found someone with whom to share his life. His happiness filled my heart with pride and happiness. We got together as a family for photos during the photo session following the ceremony. David made sure Katie was in every photo we took, and the love and solidarity we all had that day were captured in a ton of images. I couldn't help but notice that Amelia seemed a little strange during the photo shoot. I initially assumed that she was simply weary because she kept huffing and moaning heavily. Weddings are tiring, so perhaps she just needed a respite from shooting so many pictures. However, her behavior got more difficult to ignore as the session went on. Amelia's expression changed considerably as David took Katie up and held her in his arms for a photo. Her eyes were fixed on them, and she had a dissatisfied smile that wavered. Though subtle, it was obvious enough to unnerve me. Amelia approached me after we had taken a number of shots with Katie, asking if I could wheel her out so she could take some pictures with her family alone. Her tone was courteous but short. I was surprised by the request, but I granted it. Katie and I went to the reception to sit with my parents. I was fortunate to have a daughter like her, my mother said, acknowledging my daughter's beauty. Although it was a little gesture, I was pleased to see my mother overcoming her prejudices and coming to terms with my daughter's identity. What mattered most to me was that Katie appeared to have had a pleasant day overall, blissfully ignorant of any strain. From the photos and anecdotes David shared on social media, It appeared that Amelia and David were having a great time on their honeymoon after the wedding. He deserved to savor this unique moment with his new bride, therefore I was pleased for him. After they got back from their honeymoon, David asked Roger, our parents, and me to lunch at his new house. Since we hadn't actually spoken much since the wedding, I was excited to see him again at what was supposed to be a laid-back family get-together. My mom and I have reunited in a surprising way since the wedding. She had taken the time to fully apologize to me for her remarks about Katie and her encouragement to try for another child years prior. She was truly sorry, and even though I was still wary, I was glad that she had acknowledged the hurt her remarks had caused. When David saw Katie again during lunch, he was ecstatic. He enthusiastically produced a selection of presents he had brought back for her from their honeymoon as soon as we got to his house. He had obviously given each one much consideration, and when Katie opened them, her face glowed with delight. As usual, David was totally absorbed in her, asking her about her favorite aspect of the wedding and told her how much everyone had been praising her for her involvement. She was beaming from ear to ear. He often expressed his pride in her, telling her that friends and family had called him to tell him how well Katie had done after the wedding. Katie was so proud to hear all of these praises, and her eyes were sparkling with joy. But I couldn't help but observe Amelia as my brother showered Katie with love. I kept a tight eye on her, and it became clear to me that she was not feeling as excited as David. She didn't even recognize Katie, let alone smile. Rather, she appeared clearly irritated, as though David's conversation with Katie had somehow annoyed her. Her face was a mixture of frustration and anger, and she hardly spoke to anyone while David concentrated on Katie. She seemed to be eager for the moment to end so that he would stop focusing on my daughter. Naturally, David was totally unaware of his wife's behavior. As a family, we relaxed and chatted in the living room after lunch. Amelia approached me at that moment and subtly requested that we speak in private. I already knew what was about to happen, so I felt a knot form in my gut. Since the wedding day, I had been preparing for this discussion. I nodded in agreement, bracing myself for what I knew would be a challenging conversation. We sat down to chat after Amelia showed me to one of the bedrooms. She began by praising me for doing a fantastic job with Katie, meeting all of her requirements, and honoring my promise about how Katie would look at the wedding. I thanked her and nodded, explaining that it was her special day and I wanted to show her respect. After a moment, she said that although she valued my work, she had been bothered by something ever since the wedding. My heart fell. Amelia brought up the wedding pictures on her phone and browsed through the photographer's selection. I came across pictures of David, Amelia, Katie, myself, and the other family members all grinning and savoring the time spent together. Her tone became icy as she paused on a single image and gestured at it. She said, "Look at this," as she enlarged the picture. We were all grinning and looking content in one of the family pictures, with Katie in her wheelchair next to David. Katie gave me a disdainful look as Amelia's finger lingered over her. Her voice was piercing and poisonous as she asked, "Do you see how your stupid kid in a wheelchair is ruining the vibe of the entire picture?" I had trouble breathing for a while. I was stunned. How could she have spoken about my daughter in such a callous and nasty way? I was instantly filled with rage. It was intolerable that my darling daughter, who had done her best to join in the festivities, was now being held responsible for spoiling the mood. I retorted, reminding Amelia that she was aware from the beginning that Katie was in a wheelchair and that she had no right to talk about Katie in that manner. My daughter had no choice but to pose for pictures. How else could she have possibly participated? I responded. Despite my arguments, Amelia sneered and said, "That's not my problem," adding that seeing Katie's wheelchair in every photograph was an eyesore that had made it difficult for her to see the wedding photos. She went on to say that I ought to compensate her for allowing my daughter to ruin her wedding, as if that weren't enough. Her arrogance horrified me. I was so surprised that she would make such an absurd demand that I raised my voice and asked her what sort of compensation she was even referring to. Amelia hit me with her actual demand at that point. According to her, I would have to hire a photo editor to either remove Katie from the wedding shots or, at the absolute least, make her appear to be wheelchair-free. I let out an incredulous gasp. How could she possibly believe it was okay to remove my kid from the wedding pictures or change her identity for the sake of appearance? This was the tipping point. I was at my breaking point. "Are you serious?" I yelled, my voice full of incredulity. "You want me to pay someone to erase my daughter or pretend she isn't in a wheelchair? You're an a-hole, Amelia. I am proud of my daughter exactly the way she is, and I will not be paying for any kind of Photoshop. If you had such a problem with her being part of the wedding, then you should have never let her be the flower girl in the first place." Amelia countered by claiming that although she had done everything in her power to stop David from allowing Katie to be their flower girl, he could not agree because his love for her was so blind. She told me that she was aware that he would have called off the wedding if she had persisted on not inviting my daughter. When I discovered that this woman had been so bitter about Katie, I shook my head. I was shocked by the callousness and heartlessness of her logic. I sternly reprimanded her, telling her that my kid was a real person with feelings and didn't deserve to be hated in this manner. She had been truly thrilled to attend their wedding because she liked her uncle. Now that Amelia was my sister-in-law, she certainly didn't deserve to be treated this way. Amelia, however, seemed unconcerned. She countered by claiming that Katie and I were both attention seekers and that I should remember that Katie's disability was the sole reason people had taken such an interest in her during the wedding. Something inside of me exploded at the disgustingness of her comments. My long simmering anger suddenly erupted, and I slapped Amelia before I really realized what I was doing. The silence of the room reverberated with the sound of my palm touching her face. My hand was shaking as I stood there, and the weight of everything that had just transpired was heaving in my chest. Amelia's eyes widened incredulously, and her cheeks turned scarlet with horror. My brother, my husband, and my parents stormed into the room before she could react. Amelia was questioned by my brother about whether or not she meant what she had said about Katie. Amelia's eyes grew wide with insight. As it happens, David had been listening in on our entire talk and had probably heard all of her nasty and deceptive comments. Her face lit up with panic, and she made a desperate attempt to retract her statement, fumbling over her words. However, it was too late. David's voice filled the room as he screamed at her, accusing her of being arrogant and cunning for dragging me aside to discuss my daughter in such a manner. His voice was a mix of grief and rage as he said, "I can't believe you manipulated me into thinking you were a nice person when in reality you hate my family this much." He was clearly seeing Amelia for who she truly was, someone who had concealed her actual sentiments all along, and the displeasure in his tone was evident. Desperate to save face, Amelia attempted to counter the argument. As she spoke, her voice wavered. "I don't hate your family exactly. This is just about Katie," she added. Then, in an attempt to change the subject, she accused David of constantly giving preference to Katie over everyone else because he felt sorry for her due to her disability. She asserted that he should stop giving Katie so much attention and instead concentrate on their marriage because she was his wife and should receive more of his attention. Then, feeling embarrassed, Amelia started to gripe about how inviting Katie had caused some of her friends to subsequently make fun of her wedding photos. According to her, this is why she wanted to remove Katie from the pictures in Photoshop so she could always remember their lovely day free of such ugliness. David, fortunately, wasn't having it. He advised her to quit being so arrogant and to stop acting as though his niece might have ruined their photos. He claimed that her presence enhanced the beauty of the photos. "I love Katie like my own daughter," he stated. "Giving attention to her doesn't take away anything from you. The fact that I even have to explain this goes to show how cheap your mentality is. Katie is part of my family, and if you hate her this much, then I can't be married to you." When David's comments struck Amelia, her face became white. He gave her a clear look that made it clear he wasn't going to overlook this. "You're an ableist," he continued, repeating what I had said before. "The fact that you continue to justify your behavior means that you will never change. I do not want to be married to a cruel woman like you. Pack up your things and go back to your parents' place." Still in disbelief, Amelia attempted to protest again, but my mother, who had been silent until now, finally interrupted, clearly furious. She was upset at the circumstance, stating that although it was one thing to not enjoy the attention Katie got at the wedding, it was cruel to think of removing her from the photos. My mother informed Amelia that she should feel ashamed of herself for ever bringing up the subject, and she firmly expressed her support for David's choice. Amelia realized she had nothing left to stand on after hearing my mother's defense and witnessing David's uncompromising position. My husband appeared enraged, and I have no doubt that he would have physically assaulted Amelia for saying such awful things about our kid if she hadn't been my brother's wife at the time. Her actual nature had been exposed for everyone to see, and Amelia was outnumbered. She reluctantly left the house with only her phone and car keys because she had no other option. I was grateful that David stood up for Katie, but he later apologized to Roger and me for what his wife had said about our daughter. He has nothing to do with this. Probably after Amelia had gone to them in tears, Amelia's parents called David and my parents that evening to talk more about the matter. But David had asked for a break so he could calm himself and consider the situation. Amelia has been messaging me ever since the incident, essentially accusing me of causing friction between her and David. She believes that by agreeing to pay for a photo editor, I could have easily resolved their problems. Naturally, I don't want to be the reason my brother's marriage fails, but I also can't forgive what Amelia said to me about my kid. Update 1. I can't respond to everyone because I'm getting so many DMs and comments. I shall therefore make all the points clear here. Amelia was aware of Katie's friendship with my brother because she had previously met her. However, it appeared that she had been able to hide her contempt for my daughter for a long time. I had never had the slightest suspicion that she truly detested my kid to this extent. We try our best to make Katie feel as normal as possible so she doesn't feel like she is being treated differently because of her impairment, but I recognize that some people may find it awkward to see a child in a wheelchair, especially during a wedding. Regardless of the fact that Katie is in a wheelchair, I am sure that people would still find her attractive. She has her dad's blonde hair and blue eyes. Amelia was obviously merely attempting to point out my daughter's flaws out of jealousy. Katie's godfather is my brother. This is because I know that my husband will support my daughter no matter what happens to us. He is extremely protective of Katie since he loves her like his own daughter. It must have felt like a total betrayal to him to hear Amelia's statements and realize her actual intentions toward my daughter. Since Katie was absorbed in her cartoons, I doubt she heard anything Amelia and I said. She would have undoubtedly questioned me later if she had. Update 2. In case you were wondering, my brother is having his wedding revoked. My brother and his attorney are adamant that Katie lied to him from the beginning and tricked him into believing she would get along with his family when she wouldn't. Amelia panicked and tried desperately to keep her marriage intact when she realized that David was truly serious about leaving her. She made a pathetic attempt to apologize to me, but it was obvious to me that her words were not sincere. She wasn't prepared to accept responsibility for her actions or show true regret. Knowing that her apologies was merely a ruse to deflect criticism from herself, I was unable to accept it. Her rage was only increased by this. She became angry with me right away and accused me of destroying my brother's life. It seemed as though I was the cause of all her issues instead of the results of her own decisions. She accused me of being the one who made my brother leave her when he could have been content with her. As if that weren't enough, Amelia's parents also contacted my parents in an effort to place the responsibility for their daughter's struggles on Katie and me. Fortunately, my parents have denied this unjust claim. In particular, my dad expressed his disappointment, telling them that he is glad she will no longer be a part of our family and that they should be embarrassed of the daughter they raised. The fact that my family has supported Katie and me over this entire ordeal makes me really proud. I did apologize to my brother for what he was going through with Amelia when we spoke. He convinced me that knowing the truth about her now was preferable to later, when she may have said or done something more hurtful in front of Katie. I absolutely concur, and I'm relieved that we are also successfully removing Amelia from our lives. Update 3. My previous update was 4 months ago. For those who are curious, my brother is no longer married to Amelia after formally annulling their union. Everyone reacted negatively to Amelia after the truth about their failing marriage was made public. Eventually, she apologized to me, but I just blocked her without answering. We all had a vacation together not long ago. We had an amazing time together. I'm really happy that David and Katie still have such a wonderful connection. I'm thankful that the entire ordeal has only made our family ties stronger. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. My ex and his mistress crashed my open house, mocking my success. But they didn't realize I had already built a life they couldn't destroy. As I reposition the expertly arranged throw pillows on the couch, the aroma of freshly made cookies fills the air. In our company, it's the small details that make a big difference. The open house is prepared to greet prospective buyers, so I take a moment to appreciate my job. I freeze as I turn to see how the refreshments are doing. Ethan and Chloe, my ex-husband and his new wife, whom he left me for, enter the house with the audacity of brass. I put on my most polished smile, but I'm furious on the inside. As he walks up to me, Ethan grins and says, well, if it isn't Zara. Still trying to sell houses? I see. Condescension permeates Chloe's voice when she adds her voice. I'm surprised you're still in this business, Zara. Ethan told me you were never really cut out for it. Refusing to give them the gratification of witnessing my tremors, I bite my tongue. Ethan. Chloe. What a surprise. I didn't expect to see you here. Are you looking for a new place? Ethan wraps Chloe's waist with his arm. Thought we'd see what you have to offer. I recognize the irony. I gave my all to our marriage years ago while helping Ethan establish his legal practice. But I was never good enough at anything. He became aloof, judgmental, and constantly looking for flaws. I obtained my real estate license because I was determined to contribute and forge my own path. At every opportunity, Ethan disparaged my efforts and claimed I was squandering my time. I should have recognized the warning flags back then, but I was too infatuated and blind. I confronted him after learning of his affair with his much younger assistant Chloe. They refer to it as gaslighting since he denied it and made me feel like I was going insane. The truth was right in front of me, even if I didn't want to believe it. I was caught off guard by the divorce. What a joke, Ethan filed, claiming irreconcilable differences. Before the ink on the paperwork dried, he moved in with Chloe. He did everything he could to leave me with nothing, even though I battled valiantly for a just settlement. I reached my lowest point, but I didn't want to stay there. Determining to succeed on my own terms, I put my all into my work, and I succeeded. I launched my own agency after becoming a top-selling agent. I made it my goal to assist women who are struggling, like myself, in finding their ideal houses and starting over. And now I find myself confronting my past. Ethan and Chloe, who are trying to reduce their household size. The thought of their financial difficulties makes me feel a little satisfied. I put on my best act and lead them around the house, pointing out its features. I ignore the sarcastic remarks that Ethan mutters. With her gaze darting anxiously between us, Chloe appears preoccupied. I can't help but make a small jab as we finish the trip. I'm sure I can find you something that fits your budget. My business has been thriving, and I have a lot of high-profile clients. I'm sure I can help you out. Ethan lashes out as his face flushes. You got lucky, Zara. You're just riding on my coattails. I give a charming smile. Luck has nothing to do with it, Ethan. I worked hard for what I have, and I did it all without you. I can see the flaws in their flawless facade as Chloe shifts uneasily. They have no idea what lies ahead. This is only the beginning. As I drive home from the open house, the memories come flooding back. Chloe's scathing comments, Ethan's arrogant expression. They remind me of everything I've attempted to move past, and they're like a knife twisting in my stomach. I remember our marriage, how I helped Ethan through law school, how I had faith in him when others had lost faith. As he started his business from the beginning, I supported him at every turn. But he drifted farther away the more successful he got. I was never good enough at anything. I would act as though I didn't notice when he would arrive home late and smell like perfume and drink. He would simply grunt and withdraw to his study even though I would prepare his favorite dishes and attempt to converse with him. I still recall the day I made the decision to obtain my real estate license. I was sick of depending on Ethan for everything and feeling like a burden. I desired to have something of my own and to contribute. Ethan laughed in my face when I told him about my plans. You? A real estate agent? Don't be ridiculous, Zara. You don't have what it takes. Even though what he said hurt, I didn't let it stop me. I put a lot of effort into my studies, aced my tests, and jumped right into my new job. However, Ethan never helped me. He would minimize my endeavors, claiming that I was squandering my time. The day I learned about Chloe then arrived. I discovered a flirtatious text message between Ethan and his assistant on his phone. My heart broke into a million fragments. That night, my voice trembling with rage and betrayal, I faced him. How could you do this to me, Ethan? To us? He lied while staring me in the eye. I don't know what you're talking about, Zara. You're being paranoid. There's nothing going on between me and Chloe. I fervently hoped that he was telling the truth. But I knew in my heart. It all made sense. The late hours at work, the covert phone conversations, the way he glanced at her when he believed I wasn't looking. After I engaged a private investigator, pictures of Ethan and Chloe caught in the act were revealed. I challenged him once more, this time with evidence. I guess you weren't enough for me, Zara. I need someone who understands me, who supports my dreams, he remarked with a shrug. It was an awful divorce. Ethan resisted me at every turn, attempting to deprive me of everything. He even dared to say that I was the one who had cheated on him. I eventually left with a just settlement, but I was devastated. The greatest years of my life had been spent with Ethan, and he had tossed it all away as if it didn't matter. I reached my lowest point, but I didn't want to stay there. I put all of my effort into my work because I wanted to disprove Ethan. I would prove to him that I was capable of succeeding without his help. And I did. I launched my own agency after becoming a top-selling agent. Helping women like myself who had been knocked down but refused to stay there was my goal. However, everything comes flooding back when I meet Ethan and Chloe today. The hurt, the betrayal, the rage. I want to lash out, scream, and give them even a small portion of the pain they inflicted on me. I won't though. I am superior to that. I'm more powerful than that. I have created a life for myself that Ethan will never be able to take away. I inhale deeply and exhale slowly as I pull into my driveway. I refuse to be affected by them. I refuse to let them prevail. I'm a survivor named Zara. And I will be damned if I let Chloe and Ethan drag me down once more. On a Tuesday, the divorce papers arrived. The receptionist buzzed me while I was reviewing some postings at my desk. "Zara, there's a courier here for you. He says it's urgent." With trembling hands, I ripped the packet open and signed for it. I was immediately struck by the words, "Petition for divorce." Next to the checkbox for irreconcilable differences, Ethan's name stood out accusingly. It seemed as though someone had punched me in the stomach. Even though I knew things were awful, I never imagined he would get this bad. I never imagined that he would simply give up on us. He wasn't picking up when I called him. My voice became increasingly frantic as I left message after message. "Ethan, please, can we just talk about this? Can we try to work it out?" However, he had vanished. His car was gone as I passed our house, and there was a moving van parked in front of it. As I sat there with the engine running and tears running down my cheeks, the neighbors looked at me pityingly. He moved in with Chloe that same day, as I later learned. He lacked the civility to wait for the divorce to be finalized. He was eager to begin his new life with her. It was an awful divorce. Ethan tried to leave me with nothing, but he fought me to the death. He engaged the most skilled and merciless attorneys, and they thoroughly destroyed me in court. I recall sitting across from him in that impersonal courtroom on the day of the last hearing. He refused to even glance in my direction, instead focusing on Chloe, who was sitting smugly in the front row. It ended when the judge struck his gavel. Even though I received a settlement, it felt like a pointless win. Everything that had ever been important to me was gone. After that, I reached my lowest point. In the morning, I was barely able to get out of bed, much less go to work. To dull the ache, I started drinking. I pushed my family and friends away. I didn't want their platitudes or sympathy. However, I woke up one day and understood that I couldn't continue in this manner. I couldn't allow Ethan to prevail. I couldn't allow him to ruin me. I put my all into my work because I was determined to be successful. I accepted every client and every listing. Fueled by an unquenchable fire in my gut, I worked harder than I had ever done. Painfully and slowly, I began to reconstruct my life. I discovered a new apartment, a little, comfortable space that was exclusively mine. I met new pals who were not sympathetic toward me and who were unaware of my background. I concentrated on finding my clients the homes of their dreams. I focused on helping women going through divorces, women who, like me, were beginning over. I became their rock and advocate. I began to recover as the months stretched into years. The pain grew tolerable, but it never quite disappeared. I discovered how to cope with it and turn it into motivation for my goals. I launched my own agency after becoming a top-selling agent. I surrounded myself with positive, self-believing people. I discovered a fresh feeling of direction and motivation for getting out of bed in the morning. However, I will always remember what Ethan did to me. He threw me aside like I was nothing, and I will never forget it. And I promised to hold him accountable one day. I would one day show him what he lost by choosing Chloe over me. I would get my revenge one day. I put my attention on my work, my clients, and creating the life I deserve for the time being. Zara here, and I'm not going to be broken. As the years went by, I threw myself wholeheartedly into my profession. I accepted every challenge and every listing. I was determined to prove myself, so I put in more hours than everyone else, and it was successful. I became the top-selling agent in my office as my sales figures soared. My clients were so pleased with me that they told their friends and relatives about me. My area of expertise was helping women who were starting over or going through difficult circumstances. I turn into their confidant and mentor. I assist them in locating homes, places where they can recover and start over. At her closing, one of my clients, Sarah, a single mother, gives me a big hug. With tears in her eyes, "I couldn't have accomplished this without you, Zara," she says. "You gave me the strength to start over, to believe in myself again." Her advice sticks with me and strengthens my resolve. I understand what it's like to feel lost and like you've reached your lowest point. However, I am also aware that it is possible to rise above the past and create a new life from its ashes. I launch my own agency and surround myself with a group of strong, kind ladies. We establish ourselves as the agency of choice for women in transition, those who require a little more understanding and support. I establish myself as a respected member of the community, and my business prospers. I get asked to offer my experience and knowledge at conferences. For young women who are interested in real estate, I even launched a mentorship program. But Ethan is always in the forefront of my mind. I will always remember how he deceived me and abandoned me, leaving me broken and alone. I monitor him and his legal practice. I hear tales of unethical behavior and clients that feel taken advantage of and deceived. I waited for the ideal opportunity to present itself. I'm prepared to wait as long as it takes since I understand that retaliation is a dish that tastes the finest cold. Then, one day, an opportunity presents itself. I'm holding an open house for a luxurious home, a magnificent mansion with expansive city views. I hear a recognizable voice behind me while I'm displaying the gourmet kitchen. Zara, I thought that was you. When I turn around, I see Ethan and Chloe, who appear older and more scruffy than I recall. Chloe's face is unpleasant and pinched, and Ethan's hair is becoming gray at the temples. Ethan, Chloe, what a surprise, I say calmly, with a kind smile. I didn't expect to see you here. Chloe says, we're looking for a new place, as she glances around the room. Something a little more affordable. My eyebrows go up. Oh, we're having some financial trouble, are we? Ethan frowns, his face flushed. That's none of your business, Zara, we're just exploring our options. I grin slowly, like a predator. Of course. Well, as you can see, business is booming for me. I've got high-profile clients from all over the city, and my agency is thriving. I'm sure I could find you something suitable. We don't need your help, Zara. We're doing just fine on our own, Ethan says, glaring at me while Chloe appears uneasy. I turn back to the kitchen and shrug. Suit yourself. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me. I can't help but feel a rush of satisfaction as they leave. Despite the fact that Ethan broke me once, I've become stronger and better than before. Now that I've witnessed his struggles and the weaknesses in his flawless exterior, I know it's almost time for me to exact my retribution. Even though I lost the battle years ago, I'm still committed to winning the war. And with my pride and head held high, I'll do it how I want. Despite having ruined my past, Ethan and Chloe have no influence over my future. I'm Zara, and I can't be stopped. My assistant buzzes me when I'm sitting in my office a few days after the open house. Zara, there's Chloe here to see you. She says it's urgent. A glimmer of astonishment passes, but I maintain my composure. Send her in. Chloe enters, appearing worn out and anxious. She avoids my eyes as she fidgets with her purse. Zara, I need your help. I recline in my chair and examine her. Oh? And why would I help you, Chloe? You and Ethan made it pretty clear you wanted nothing to do with me. She inhales deeply before finally seeing me in the eye. Ethan and we're having some financial difficulties. His law firm is struggling, and we're barely making ends meet. We need to sell our house, but we don't know where to start. At what she said, I can't help but feel a little satisfied. The powerful lawyer, Ethan, came to me and begged for my assistance. How the powerful have fallen, oh. However, I maintain a neutral look and a professional voice. I see. And you think I'm the right person to help you? With beseeching eyes, Chloe nods. You're the best in the business, Zara, everyone knows that. And I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I'm hoping we can put that behind us, for the sake of our shared history. Sensing an opening, I resist the want to laugh in her face and tell her precisely where she can stick her shared history. Very well, I responded as I straightened my skirt and got to my feet. I'll take a look at your property and see what I can do, but I make no promises. With a look of relief on her face, Chloe nods enthusiastically. Thank you, Zara. You have no idea how much this means to us. Oh, but I think I do, Chloe. I think I know exactly how much it means to you. And I plan to use that to my full advantage. I help Ethan and Chloe prepare their house for sale over the course of the following few weeks. I send in my crew of photographers and stage designers to turn the dilapidated property into a sleek, contemporary focal point. I can't help but notice the tension between them, though, even while I work. Being irritated and short-tempered, Ethan lashes out at Chloe over the simplest things. In contrast, Chloe appears withdrawn and miserable, with dead dull eyes. One day, Chloe pulls me away while we're reviewing some papers. Zara, can I talk to you for a minute? In private? I walk her into a quiet room and nod. Her hands tremble as she inhales deeply. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Ethan, he's not the man I thought he was. I pretend to be surprised and raise an eyebrow. Oh. What do you mean? Tears come to Chloe's eyes. He's controlling, manipulative. He's been emotionally abusive for years, but I never wanted to admit it. I thought I could change him, but I was wrong. I suppressed the glimmer of pity I have for her. This woman destroyed my life by stealing my spouse. I cannot afford to be sympathetic to her. I'm sorry to hear that, Chloe, I remarked in a calm, non-committal tone. But what do you expect me to do about it? Her eyes are beseeching as she looks at me. I don't know. I just needed to tell someone. I feel so trapped. So alone. I nod, my thoughts rushing. It's this. This is my chance to finally defeat Ethan, the moment I've been waiting for. I understand. I put a hand on her shoulder and said. And I want to help you, Chloe. But you have to be willing to help yourself first. You have to be ready to leave him. To start over. Her face crumples as she nods. I know. I do. But I'm scared, Zara. I'm so scared. I give her a shoulder squeeze while speaking in a forceful yet comforting tone. I understand how you're feeling, but know that you're not alone, Chloe. I'm here to support you, and together, we'll make sure Ethan receives the justice he deserves. I'm polite and professional, but I can't help but notice the building tension between Ethan and Chloe as we work closely together over the following 3 days, showing them possible properties that match their budget. Ethan is irritable and angry, sneering at each house I show them. Is this all you can do, Zara? I believed you were meant to be the town's top agent. Keeping my smile intact, I bite back a retort. I promise you, Ethan, that I'm showcasing the finest houses within your budget. However, I'm happy to keep searching if you have a specific idea in mind. During our showings, Chloe appears withdrawn and preoccupied. She seldom talks and keeps her eyes on the ground. I see her glancing at Ethan with a mix of fear and hatred, and I know that our chat from the other day is still a big part of her thoughts. Chloe abruptly interrupts us as we're driving back from yet another failed showing, saying, Zara, is it possible for us to speak in private? I turn to look at Ethan, who is frowning out the window. Chloe, of course. How about we get coffee? After dropping Ethan off at their hotel with the promise that we will meet later to discuss some paperwork, I take Chloe to a quiet cafe and order a cappuccino for the two of us. I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, about leaving Ethan, starting over, she says, taking a big breath while holding her mug tightly. I maintain a neutral expression as I nod. And what have you decided? Tears well up in Chloe's eyes as she says, I'm not sure whether I can do it. I've known him my entire life, and I'm afraid of what he might do if I try to leave. I take her hand across the table and say, I know it's scary, Chloe. But this is far less than what you deserve. Instead of someone who depresses and manipulates you, you deserve to be with someone who loves and respects you. She wipes her eyes with a tissue and nods, saying, I understand. You're correct, I know that. However, I'm not really sure where to begin. Squeezing her hand, I say in a firm but comforting manner, start by speaking with a lawyer. Find out what alternatives you have. Meanwhile, keep a record of everything. Note every instance of Ethan being domineering or abusive. If you choose to leave, it will help you make a stronger argument. Chloe nods and takes a trembling breath. All right, I can do that, all right. With a glimmer of optimism, I grin at her and say, and Chloe, keep in mind, you're not alone, I'm here to support you at every turn. Ethan is waiting excitedly in the hotel foyer as we return after finishing our coffee. Where have you been? Glaring at Chloe, he yells, I've been waiting for more than an hour. I move forward and say, I'm sorry, Ethan, in a composed and businesslike tone. I promise that everything is in control, but Chloe and I had some business to discuss. His eyes widen as he frowns at me, saying, it had better be. Zara, I'm too busy to play any more of your games. With a lazy, rapt smile, I say to him, oh, Ethan, you have no idea what kind of game I'm playing. I can feel his gaze piercing my back as I turn to leave, but I ignore it since I have work to do. I assist Chloe in gathering proof of Ethan's abuse over the course of the following several weeks, and she begins journaling, recording every harsh remark and every act of control. She also takes pictures of the bruises on her arms and the holes he has punched in the walls. I'm also constructing my own case against him in the meantime. When the time comes to finally take Ethan down, I'll be prepared to watch him fall and see the expression on his face when he realizes that he's finally met his match. In Zara, the woman he once destroyed, the woman who rose from the ashes, stronger and more powerful than ever before, the woman who will be his ultimate downfall. I reach out to some of his former clients, the ones who felt cheated and misused, and I gather evidence of his unethical practices and shady dealings. I didn't anticipate the day of reckoning coming so quickly. Chloe, who is distraught, answers the phone as I'm in my office reviewing some papers. Zara, please, you have to help me. Ethan learned about the attorney. He is enraged. He's threatening to destroy me and injure me. In a second, I'm standing up and reaching for my purse and keys. Listen, Chloe. Now leave that place. Find a secure location. I'll look after Ethan. On the other end of the line, I can hear her crying. All right, I'll go to my sister's apartment. But please, Zara, exercise caution. He's not thinking clearly. My heart pounding, I hang up the phone, knowing what I must do. My thoughts racing with potential outcomes. I know I need to be clever about this. Have to play my cards exactly right, as I make my way to Ethan's office. He looks up from his desk, his face contorted with anger, and they enter his office without knocking, holding my head high. "What the hell are you doing here, Zara?" I give him a chilly, cunning smile and say, "Ethan, I believe you understand exactly why I'm here. I am aware of the things you have been doing to Chloe. I am aware of the manipulation and abuse." With his hands clenched at his sides, he gets to his feet and says, "Zara, you don't know anything. You're just a resentful, envious lady who finds it impossible to move on from the past." With a hard, brittle laugh, I say, "Oh, Ethan, you don't know what I'm capable of. I have been observing you in order to collect proof. I am aware of your dubious activities and immoral behavior. I have enough to demolish everything you've ever worked for and ruin you." I can see the terror in his eyes as his face goes pale. "You're bluffing. You've got nothing on me." "Oh, but I do, Ethan," I say, reaching into my purse and taking out a big folder. "You cheated and lied to your former clients, and I have their testimonies. I have financial documents that prove your fraud and embezzlement. I have pictures of the bruises you gave Chloe when you were angry." He rushes to retrieve the folder as I hurl it onto his desk. "Ethan, it's over. You're done. And I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison if you ever approach Chloe again or touch her." His face twisted with dread and anger, he looks up at me and says, "Zara, you can't do this, you can't ruin me." With a low, ominous whisper, I bend up close and say, "Watch me." He takes my arm and digs his fingers into my skin as I turn to go. "Zara, you'll pay for this? I'll see to that." With my eyes burning with rage, I yank my arm away. "No, Ethan. You will be held accountable for what you have done to Chloe, me, and everyone else you have harmed in the process. I'm going to be the one to ensure that you make the payment." With my heart thumping in my chest, I leave his office, knowing that this is only the beginning and that a long and challenging road lies ahead, but I also know that I'm prepared for it. I'm ready to stand up for what's right, to regain the power that Ethan took from me all those years ago. I get into my car and drive to Chloe's sister's house, my mind racing with potential solutions. I know I must be there for her, to support her during this trying time, but I also know I must be strong, to take the lead, because this is my battle too. I am Zara, and I am a force to be reckoned with. Heaven help anyone who tries to stand in my way. This is my chance to put things right, to get the retribution I have been longing for. And I will not stop until Ethan is held accountable and made to pay for all the suffering he has caused. The consequences of my confrontation with Ethan are swift and severe. Within days, his abusive behavior and unethical practices are widely publicized in the city's newspapers and news websites. His law firm collapses, sending clients running in droves. His partners distance themselves in an attempt to preserve their own reputations. And Ethan himself is humiliated, his name becoming associated with dishonesty and corruption. Knowing that I contributed to his demise, I watch it all play out with a grim sense of satisfaction, but I also know that my work is far from done. Chloe files for divorce, and I assist her in finding a new home, a modest but comfortable apartment in a quiet neighborhood. She is terrified and overwhelmed, but I reassure her that she is not alone and that there are people who want to support her. She tells me about years of abuse and manipulation, the ongoing fear and self-doubt, and I tell her about my own divorce, how Ethan almost destroyed me but I found the strength to rebuild my life. We spend long hours talking, sharing our stories and our pain, and together we begin to heal, finding a new sense of purpose and hope. Chloe goes to treatment and begins classes to complete her degree. I immerse myself in my profession, committed to changing the lives of other women who have experienced similar hardships. After a few months, things start to return to normal, and Ethan fades into the background as a warning about what happens when ego and power run amok. However, one day, I get a call that completely alters everything. Ethan is pleading with me for assistance. "Zara, please," he pleads in a broken and frantic voice. I know I have no right to ask, but I don't know where else to turn. My freedom, my reputation, and my career are all on the line. I need your assistance. I'm tempted to end the call and let him pay for his crimes, but then I recall something my therapist said about the need for forgiveness and how harboring hate and resentment ultimately damages us. I inhale deeply and then make a choice that even surprises me. "All right, Ethan, I'll assist you. But not for me, nor for you. Because in order to move on with my life, I must let go of the past." We meet at a coffee shop, and as I listen to him open up to me about his anxieties, his regrets, and his desperate attempt to put things right, I feel a shift in myself. A sense of release and closure. Then, feeling lighter than I have in years, I get up to go, giving him tools and advice on how to get assistance and make amends. With tears in his eyes, he adds, "Thank you, Zara. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm grateful nonetheless. With a little smile teasing my lips, I nod. Ethan, look after yourself. Additionally, keep in mind that there is always time to start afresh. I feel at peace as I leave the coffee shop, knowing that although I will always remember the suffering and anguish of my past, I have managed to go on and create a new life founded on fortitude, resiliency, and optimism. I feel a rush of pride and thankfulness for how far I've come and for the person I've become when I think back to the woman I was all those years ago, the one who was lost and shattered and believed she would never find her way out of the darkness. I am Zara, a lady who has persevered through hardships and emerged stronger on the other side. I am confident that I possess the bravery and tenacity to confront any obstacles life presents and to keep going forward, one step at a time. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. My brother-in-law who married my sister told my wife that he was in love with her. This led to a chain of horrific discoveries in our family. Yesterday, out of the blue, my brother-in-law asked my wife if she could meet him for lunch. He said there was something he needed to talk to her about. When my wife told me about his invitation, she seemed puzzled but not overly concerned. "Do you think it's about my sister?" she asked, furrowing her brow. "Maybe they're having problems, and he wants to get a woman's perspective on things." I found the whole situation odd. My brother-in-law had never reached out to my wife in this way before, but he often texted her and other family members for mundane reasons, so I didn't think much of it. After all, we were a close-knit family, and it wasn't unusual for us to support each other through tough times. "Go find out," I told her, shrugging off my initial unease. My wife agreed, deciding to meet him at a cafe near her office the next day. The next morning, as she was getting ready for work, she mentioned lunch again. "I'm still not sure what this is about," she said, a hint of worry in her voice. I reassured her, saying it was probably nothing serious. "Just listen to what he has to say, and if it's something we need to help with, we'll figure it out together," I said. It's a busy cafe, filled with the usual lunchtime crowd, and my wife feels a bit more at ease being in such a public setting. She arrives a bit early, finding a table near the window where she can keep an eye on the entrance. He arrives a few minutes later, looking more nervous than she's ever seen him. They exchange the usual pleasantries, talking about work and the kids for a few minutes. But then, as soon as their food arrives, he takes a deep breath and dives into what he really came to say. He starts by complimenting her, telling her how beautiful she looks. At first, she thinks he's just being polite, but then he keeps going. He tells her how she's always been the light in his life, how she makes him feel things he's never felt before. "It was love at first sight," he says, his voice trembling slightly. "I've loved you since the moment I first laid eyes on you. If you were mine, I would treat you like the queen you are. I'd give you everything you deserve." My wife is stunned. She stares at him, unable to believe what she's hearing. This man, my brother-in-law, married to my sister and father of their 2 kids, is pouring his heart out to her. He lays it on thick, making grand promises about how different life would be if they were together. He goes on, saying how he's been holding these feelings in for years, how he's watched her and admired her from afar, feeling more and more that they're meant to be together. She tries to interrupt, to tell him he's making a huge mistake, but he keeps talking over her, almost as if he's rehearsed this speech 1,000 times in his head. Mind you, this man has always had a friendly relationship with my wife. Our families see each other often since we're a close-knit bunch. He's always been the fun uncle to our kids, the guy who's there at every family barbecue, every holiday dinner. He does text my wife frequently, but it's always been about mundane things, the kids' schedules, family events, things like that. Nothing overly sexual, nothing that would set off any alarms. In fact, he texts and calls my mom too. They have a friendly rapport, and none of us ever thought anything of it. To us, he's always been just a good guy, someone we trust implicitly. So to hear my wife recount this to me is like a punch to the gut. My wife doesn't let him finish. She stands up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walks out. She's shaking as she calls me, telling me everything that just happened. While she's on the phone with me, the texts from him start. First it's apologies. He didn't mean it, he thinks it's only infatuation. He's sorry for making her uncomfortable. But the damage is done. She leaves work early to come home and talk to me about this, her phone buzzing incessantly with his calls and messages. I tell her to answer one of his calls, to put him on speaker so I can hear. He's crying, begging her not to tell my sister. He keeps saying it was a mistake, that he misread signals, that he thought she felt the same way. Apparently, when we were together this past weekend, he thought my wife was flirting with him, that they had a moment alone in our kitchen where he felt a connection. My wife is a major ballbuster, and I suppose I can see how that can be taken as flirting, but this is beyond anything we could have imagined. He asks if she told me, And I answer yes, as I'm on speaker. Then he starts begging me too, pleading for us to keep this a secret. This went on for a while, him begging and us listening. My main question was whether he had cheated on my sister before. He swore he hadn't, swearing on his kids' lives that it was just my wife. He said I should understand that it was her, only her. At that point, I was done listening. I told him I wasn't going to do anything tonight and that I'd call him tomorrow. Now we're left with this mess, not knowing what to do next. My wife says we should drive over there right now and tell my sister, but the idea of wrecking my sister's family is killing me. Thinking about what this will do to my nieces makes me want to vomit. I know the right thing to do is to tell my sister, but I'm also thinking about my wife. It's not her fault, but there's sure to be resentment from my family. Even if my sister doesn't divorce him and they reconcile, I can't see how we'll ever be together again like we were before, if at all. This whole episode can tear my family apart. I don't give a shit about him. He tried to destroy my family, but I do care about everyone else. Update. So everyone that told me last night that I couldn't wait to tell my sister was right. A little after 12, I got a call from my sister. She sounded upset and said she had to tell me something. My heart sank as she explained that her husband, my brother-in-law, had come to her in tears, claiming my wife had tried to begin an affair with him. He spun a tale where my wife was the instigator, trying to shift the blame entirely onto her. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I immediately told my sister that wasn't the case and assured her I would be right over. This situation needed to be addressed face to face, not over the phone. I hung up and, with a sense of urgency, called my parents. I woke my mother and father, explaining what was happening in quick clipped sentences. My father was furious. My mother sounded shocked, but resolute. They agreed to head over to my sister's house to sit with her kids, offering the support she would desperately need right now. Next, I called my younger brother. He groggily answered, confusion turning to alarm as I filled him in. He promised to come over to our place and stay with our kids, ensuring they wouldn't be left alone during this turmoil. His calm, steady presence would be a comfort to them. Meanwhile, my wife was already gathering her things, her face pale and drawn. She was dreading the confrontation, but knew it was necessary. We left the house in a hurry, the drive to my sister's place feeling longer than it actually was. The silence in the car was heavy, both of us lost in our thoughts. When we arrived, the scene was even more tense than I had imagined. My sister is out on the front porch with my brother-in-law when we get there. He looks beaten, eyes downcast, his posture slumped in defeat. He knows we have the texts and voicemails, the undeniable proof of his betrayal. I really don't know what he was hoping to accomplish by calling my sister in the middle of the night with his lies. Maybe he thought he could get ahead of the story, twist the narrative to save himself, but it was a futile effort. As we walk up to them, the tension in the air is palpable. My wife is trembling, her face a mask of controlled anger and hurt. She hands my sister her phone without a word. My sister takes it, her hands steady but her eyes burning with a mix of fury and pain. She scrolls through the texts, her expression hardening, with each one she reads. Then she listens to the voicemails, the damning evidence of his declarations, and her refusals. Before she can say anything, my brother-in-law starts sobbing. This is a man who runs into burning buildings, who faces danger daily without flinching. Seeing him like this, broken and vulnerable, is jarring. His cries are deep and guttural, raw with regret and fear. It's a scene that's almost surreal. A big tough firefighter brought to his knees by his own actions. My sister's face remains impassive, a mask of stern resolve. She's always been tough, but right now, she's unyielding. She waits for him to finish, her silence more powerful than any words. When he finally quiets down, still hiccuping with the remnants of his sobs, she speaks. Pack a bag and go, she says, her voice cold and clear. I can't stand to look at you. He tries to argue, to plead his case, but she's having none of it. Stop it, she snaps, cutting through his words. There's nothing you can say that will make this better. She turns away from him, walks over to my wife, and pulls her into a hug. It's a moment of solidarity between them, a small comfort in the middle of this nightmare. They've been friends since college, and the strength of their bond is evident. It's a relief to see that despite everything, they're standing together. This leaves me standing with my brother-in-law. He's a wreck, his face red and swollen from crying, his shoulders slumped. He looks at me, his eyes pleading for some kind of understanding or forgiveness, but I have none to offer. He tries to speak, his voice cracking, but I cut him off. You need to leave, I say firmly. This is your mess. You need to deal with the consequences. He nods, defeated, and slowly makes his way inside to pack his things. My sister stays with my wife, the two of them talking quietly, leaning on each other for support. The rest of the night is a blur of conversations and plans. We all rally around my sister, helping her figure out what to do next, how to protect her kids from the fallout. My sister begins questioning my wife, trying to understand why her husband thought any of this could possibly work out. He must have had some reason to believe she reciprocated his feelings. My sister insists that there hadn't been any issues in their marriage, everything had been normal. My wife is crying at this point, tears streaming down her face as she tries to make sense of the situation. "There's nothing you haven't seen," she says, her voice shaking. She hands my sister her phone again, and together they painstakingly go through every text message sent over the past 2 years. They read each one carefully, looking for any hint of inappropriate behavior, but there's nothing there. My wife was just being herself. She has a playful personality, always joking around and teasing. It's part of what makes her so lovable and approachable. My brother-in-law has a similar sense of humor, and they've always teased each other in a lighthearted, harmless way. She does the same with my mom and my younger brother. It's just how she interacts with people. The only incident my wife can think of that might have been misconstrued happened this past weekend. She recounts it, trying to pinpoint where things went wrong. They were all together at our place, and she and my brother-in-law both reached for the fridge at the same time. They playfully jostled for who would get there first, laughing as they did so. He let her win, but then he reached around her waist to grab a beer, moving his hand slowly. She admits that in that moment, the way he did it felt a little inappropriate. It was a fleeting feeling, and she brushed it off, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. She wonders now if her silence gave him some misguided hope. My sister listens, her expression softening. She doesn't blame my wife for any of this. She knows her well enough to understand that her playful nature isn't an invitation for anything more. "It's not your fault," she reassures her, and my wife nods, though the guilt still lingers. As they finish reading through the messages, it's clear there was never any mutual attraction, no hidden signals or secret flirtations. My wife was just being herself, and my brother-in-law took that, and twisted it into something it wasn't. The realization that this misunderstanding has caused so much pain is almost too much to bear, but at least, for now, my sister's belief in my wife remains intact. So then, my sister starts going through his MacBook to see what else she doesn't know about. She's angry and frantic at this point, her hands shaking as she types. She guesses the password, and on the third try, she's in. With a deep breath, she starts searching through his files, looking for anything that might shed more light on this nightmare. It doesn't take long before she finds something disturbing. There, buried in a folder labeled innocuously, are a lot of pictures of my wife. They date back years, and what's more unsettling is that they're always isolated shots, just her, never in group settings or candid family moments. My sister clicks through them, her anger turning into a cold, creeping horror. One set of photos stands out. A few years ago, we went on a couple's trip to the Caribbean. It was a rare vacation without the kids, and my wife, feeling more relaxed in the adults-only environment, had worn a bikini. She usually doesn't, preferring more modest swimwear, but this time she had felt comfortable enough to do so. There were probably 50 pictures of her in that bikini, each one taken without her knowledge. My sister's face pales as she scrolls through them. It's clear he's been secretly snapping these photos for years, collecting them obsessively. The realization that he's been harboring this fixation, lurking in the shadows of family events, sends a shiver down her spine. Does this now enter restraining order territory? She wonders aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. This has taken a creepy turn, far beyond what any of us had imagined. The boundary between inappropriate and outright disturbing has been crossed. She calls us over, showing us the pictures. My wife gasps, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. She had no idea he was doing this, no inkling of his obsession. My sister, her anger now tempered by a deep sense of betrayal, starts talking about next steps. Legal action, protection for her kids, and a restraining order. All possibilities that need to be considered now. We're all reeling from this new discovery. The man we thought we knew, who we trusted as a husband, a father, and a brother-in-law, has shown a side of himself that's dark and disturbing. It's not just a matter of infatuation anymore, it's something far more insidious. Unfortunately, the mess continues. My sister agreed to talk to her husband last night and let him explain himself. She was determined to get the full story and decided to involve my wife directly to ensure there would be no lying or half-truths. They set up a FaceTime call with my wife, and I listened in off camera, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and dread. My sister, ever thorough, recorded the entire conversation for good measure. As soon as the call began, the tension was palpable. My brother-in-law looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed and swollen from crying. He started hesitantly, his voice shaky, but as he spoke, the truth began to pour out, and the story unfolded in a way none of us had fully anticipated. He admitted he's been obsessed with my wife for years. It started the day I met her, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. He went on to explain that it was during one of those early gatherings where my sister, eager to introduce her new boyfriend to her friends, had brought him along. My wife and I were dating at the time, but he had met her before he met me. At first, he thought his feelings were purely physical, an innocent crush that he could brush aside. But as time went on and he spent more time around her, he realized it was more than that. He became fixated on her personality, her laughter, the way she interacted with everyone around her. He described moments where he found himself watching her, captivated by her presence, even as she was just being herself, playful and kind. He detailed how he had tried to suppress these feelings, convincing himself that they were harmless. But over time, his obsession grew. He started finding ways to be near her more often, volunteering to help with family events, making excuses to text her about trivial things. It was a slow, insidious process that eventually led to the point where he felt compelled to confess his feelings, deluding himself into believing she might feel the same way. My sister listened, her face a mask of controlled rage and heartbreak. She didn't interrupt him, letting him dig his own grave with each word. My wife, on the other hand, was visibly shaken. Hearing how long this had been going on, how deeply his obsession ran, was almost too much for her to bear. When he finished, there was a heavy silence. My sister finally spoke, her voice icy and measured. "What made you think that my wife would leave me for you?" she asked, her eyes boring into his. He stammered, struggling to find the right words. He mentioned the supposed mutual attraction, the moments he had misinterpreted as signs of her reciprocation. My wife and sister exploded at that point, their pent-up anger and frustration spilling over. There was a lot of cussing, a lot of screaming, the raw emotion of betrayal and hurt coming to the forefront. My wife hung up the call, her hands trembling, her face pale. She was concerned for me, for us, assuring me repeatedly that the attraction was one-sided. I believed her. I always had. Even if she did find him physically attractive at some point, I knew she would never act on it. She's serious about trust and fidelity, something she made clear early on in our relationship. This whole ordeal was a twisted fantasy of my brother-in-law's, a dangerous delusion that had nearly torn our family apart. The tension that had been building up during the call finally erupted into a storm of cussing and screaming. My wife's voice was a mix of fury and hurt, while my sister's was steely and unforgiving. The barrage of emotions was overwhelming, the air thick with betrayal and disbelief. The phone call abruptly ended when my wife, shaking and distraught, hung up because she was concerned for me. She turned to me, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "It was one-sided," she assured me, her voice trembling. "I never thought it wasn't," I replied, trying to soothe her. Even if she did find him physically attractive at some point, I knew she would never act on it. She's just not that type of person. Early on in our relationship, there was a moment that encapsulated her stance on trust and fidelity perfectly. I remember watching her one morning as she was dressing, admiring her without saying a word. She noticed, gave me a teasing smile and asked if I liked what I saw. But then her expression turned serious, almost cold. "Never fuck up," she said, her tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. "Or you'll never see this again." She meant every word. My wife is serious about trust. Once it's broken, it's almost impossible to mend. As I sat there, replaying the chaotic scene in my mind, I couldn't help but reflect on my brother-in-law. I knew he was a little cocky, always walking with a certain swagger, but my God, I never knew he thought so highly of himself to believe he could pull off something like this. His delusions of grandeur were staggering, completely detached from reality. I talked to my sister later on, once the initial shock had started to wear off and we could speak more calmly. She was resolute, determined to protect her children from the fallout of her husband's actions. She told me she would be contacting a lawyer first thing Monday morning to see what steps she could take to limit his exposure to their kids. She wanted to ensure that they were shielded from as much of this mess as possible. "As far as I'm concerned, he's detached from reality," she said, her voice steely with resolve. Her concern was no longer about saving her marriage but about safeguarding her children and maintaining a semblance of stability for them. Anyway, my brother-in-law returned home yesterday, not because my sister wants him back but because she can't legally stop him. Despite the turmoil and the clear betrayal, he has the right to be in the house until the legal proceedings move forward. The atmosphere is tense and uncomfortable, filled with unspoken words and palpable resentment. They are done, and I think he realizes that now. There's a hollow look in his eyes, as if he understands that any hope he had of salvaging their marriage is gone. The lawyer tells my sister that since my brother-in-law's behavior over the past few days has been documented, there is a good chance she will be granted full custody of the kids. The texts, voicemails, and the disturbing cache of photos all paint a clear picture of his obsession and instability. He doesn't seem to even want to fight her on that. It's as if he knows he's lost everything and is too weary to put up a battle. My sister will be fine. She's stronger than she looks, and any love she had for him is gone. She moves through the house with a determined air, her focus now entirely on her children and their future. She doesn't seem to be broken up about it. Rather, she looks like someone who's finally seen the truth and is ready to move forward. The kids don't know what happened yet. They sense something is wrong. Kids always do. But they don't know the details. My brother-in-law was never around much anyway when the kids were home. He often slept at the fire station, pulling double shifts and overtime. His absence was a constant in their lives, a silent but ever-present gap that they had grown used to. But it is certain to be hard on them once they know what's going to happen. The stability of their home, the presence of both parents, even if it was fractured, will change. My sister is prepared for this. She's already spoken to a child psychologist to help them navigate the inevitable questions and emotions that will arise. She's ready to be both mother and father, to provide them with the love and support they'll need. As for my brother-in-law, he stays in the guest room, a silent figure in a house that no longer feels like his home. He seems resigned to his fate, going through the motions but devoid of any real fight. It's a sad, pitiful sight, but my sympathy is limited. Some of my friends have said that there must be more women, that someone as obsessive as my brother-in-law couldn't have fixated on just one person. But as far as we can tell, there hasn't been anyone else. It's really just the obsession with my wife. His fixation on her has been singular and intense, leaving no room for anyone else. After everything came to light, my wife blocked his phone number, trying to create some distance and protect herself from his unwanted advances. But on the same night he returned home, he sent my wife an email from an account he had just made. It started with a seemingly sincere apology, but it quickly took a turn into something much darker. He began by saying he never got to finish at the restaurant that day, implying there was more he needed to confess. Then he launched into paragraphs and paragraphs about all the things he loves about my wife. He detailed the desperation he felt, the overwhelming emotions that had driven him to act so irrationally. He recounted every little detail he admired about her, her smile, her laugh, the way she interacted with others. It was unsettling, to say the least, to see his obsession laid out so starkly. He mentioned their supposed mutual attraction again, insisting that there was a palpable sexual tension between them that he had always felt. He was delusional, mistaking her friendly, playful nature for something more. He painted a picture of a connection that existed only in his mind, a fantasy that he had convinced himself was real. The email ended with a rather large section about me. Let's just say I didn't know he had such a low opinion of me. He was quite certain that I was not satisfying my wife properly. He criticized everything from my appearance to my demeanor, implying that I was somehow unworthy of her. His words were meant to undermine me, to sow seeds of doubt and insecurity. Reading the email was a gut punch. It was clear that his obsession with my wife had twisted his perceptions and fueled his disdain for me. He saw me as an obstacle, someone unworthy of the woman he had placed on a pedestal. But instead of feeling threatened, it only solidified my resolve to protect my wife, and my family, from his delusions. We forwarded the email to my sister and her lawyer. It was more evidence of his unstable state of mind, another piece of the puzzle that showed just how far gone he was. This email, with its mix of apology, obsession and vitriol, might be enough to get him removed from the house permanently. For now, my wife and I are taking it one day at a time. The support from our friends and family has been invaluable, helping us navigate this surreal and painful situation. Finally, my wife isn't doing great, but she is improving each day. She does feel guilty for being too comfortable around my brother-in-law. Normally, she is very careful about setting boundaries with other men. In case it wasn't clear, my wife is quite stunning and receives a lot of male attention. However, she felt safe around my brother-in-law because he was family, and she never thought he would cross any lines. Fortunately, she and my sister are on good terms, and there doesn't seem to be any resentment, which is a relief. We will all be okay, but it will take time. Thank you to everyone who commented and offered their support. My primary concern throughout this was my sister and her children. The impact of my brother-in-law's actions on their lives is immense. Ensuring their protection and emotional well-being became our priority. Children, especially, need shielding from such toxic situations to maintain their sense of security and normalcy. When faced with such a situation, it's essential to act quickly and decisively. We didn't hesitate to gather evidence, confront the issue, and involve legal help to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone involved. Procrastination or denial could have led to further harm. What do you think about this story? Please share your comments down below. Thank you for listening to Vibe Tales.